Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation, Anshe Emet. And joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed, New York City, Rabbi Barry Chesler, the Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, who is celebrating his first day of school, first official day of school here, which is why he's wearing a tie and I am not. Okay. Jeremy, you're not wearing a tie. Oh my God! So,
I'm giving an opening bracha at a school in the neighborhood on Thursday, St. Hilda's and St. Hugh's, and they said you should dress the way you dress to lead services. So I'm thinking of putting on my tefillin. I think they're thinking I'm going to wear vestments, but
my God, can you imagine? I mean, today, we're a couple of weeks before the holidays. I took my kittel in to get cleaned because it hasn't been cleaned in since before the pandemic. Okay, so it's standing alone now. This kittel, but it got me excited, kind of, for the holidays. I'm thinking like, it's time for. Well, I just bought this kittel anyway. Nitzavim Vayelekh. Nitzavim Vayelekh. We have a double portion here, ending the book of Dvarim, which is also, this is also our seventh and final week of consolation. And when we start these two parshiot, we're thinking about the end. We're thinking about how the book ends. We're thinking about how Moses' life ends. We're thinking about what kinds of things need to be said now that they have all been said for the 7 weeks leading up now. Here we are in the 8th week of this discourse. Hasn't he said everything? But there's still what to say. So on the one hand, there's a sense of tenacity, Moses' tenacity, and the other hand, the other sense is the book's got to end. The book's got to end. I want to pick up on this theme, which is how the book ends and what's going on, as Moses is ending the book and as Moses' life is ending. And I'm going to just hand it over to you, Barry, just to talk about.
So it's a curious thing. I was mentioning before he came on, I had a professor many years ago, the late Rabbi Byron Sherwin, who described the early part of Breshit as God, the portrait of God as a young artist, because God doesn't quite get it right at the beginning and has to try a few different times. And we have Adam, we have Noah in the flood, and then we have Avram singled out. And at the end, we kind of get a picture of God, the portrait of God as an older artist, but he still doesn't know how to end, just like he did not quite know how to begin, because there are a number of different endings to this book. And the curious thing to me is that ultimately Moses will just disappear. He is not going to leave a physical mark on the world, on the stage that he strode so valiantly upon for these 40 years. He's going to go away without a trace.
So it is such a remarkable facet of Deuteronomy, that, I mean, the physical nature of the life of Moses. Moses doesn't have a grave. Moses is buried by God. Nobody knows where Moses is buried, and that has some obvious repercussions, namely that place never becomes a shrine, and that he never becomes an object of worship, similar to, let's say, certain famous rabbis who are buried in certain important, cemeteries, and they are places of pilgrimage to this day. Just we'll go out a little bit on a parenthesis. There's this whole, movement of tens of thousands of people that go to Uman, right, to be with Nachman of Bratslav in Ukraine. And so this year, with the war going on still, there's this possibility that they may not let all these thousands of pilgrims come to be at the grave of Nachman of Bratslav. It's a fascinating thing. If I wasn't a pulpit rabbi, it's not that I would think I would go to Uman, but I am curious about it, at least to drop in maybe for an hour. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a long way to go to drop in for an hour, Elliot.
Of course, another shrine like the one you're talking about is the the supposed grave of Shimon ben Yochai in
In
Meron,
Meron.
that just hundreds of thousands of people go to on Lag BaOmer, and a couple of years ago there was a terrible
catastrophe.
Terrible catastrophe as there was a stampede. So just the identification of graves in the Galilee was largely a phenomenon of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the Arizal, who in the 16th century, who how do you say this appropriately? Graced with Ruach HaKodesh, he was able to identify where these graves were that nobody had ever noticed before. So he knew where Hosea the prophet was, and this one and that one, and Shimon ben Yochai, with this prophetic gift that he had. But I wonder if at some level, the seed of the need to identify the graves is stemmed. I guess it's not, I guess the origin is not Moshe, but the fact that you have no grave of Moshe is I think the religious quality of it is incredibly salutary. Moses is gone, you have his book. Okay.
That's it.
And you will be a student of his book, but you cannot venerate his person.
Yeah.
And by the way, let's say Christianity has this, of course, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is over the space where he was, supposedly the cave of Joseph of Arimathea, where he was put in but then he left it, according to them, and then he wasn't there anymore. So there is some bit of the story that says the most important person cannot, the grave part has to disappear for them.
Yeah.
And the fact that Moshe, we have his book and we don't have his location, I just think that the poetry of that and the religious meaning of that is just so awesome.
So
it makes
now we might look
it makes
at
the Torah book always, Barry said this before we started taping, it makes the Torah a book always of journeying, never arriving. People are always waiting
Absolutely.
to arrive.
Go ahead, Barry.
So we might say that it's the triumph of monotheism over magic, because without a gravesite, there's no adoration, and there aren't any relics like we find in some sister religions we're familiar with, where different things are cut up and sold, often, in a kind of almost ridiculous way, because if you would put together all the things that were supposed to be part of the cross or part of the robe, you would end up with some colossal garment or cross, that you would need Shira Koma, the book of measurements, for the divine to find an appropriate body for that.
So I just want to make one comment, and this is from Micha Goodman in his book. This came out a couple of years ago, or last year, and he says basically that, which is the body doesn't go in, but the words do go in, and on a corollary to that is words necessitate study and conversation. So we could add, and he makes this point also, that Dvarim actually gives the spark to what becomes Torah Shebal Peh. That having the words mean you have to discuss the words, and discussing the words is exactly what we're doing, and we live through this. This is one of the things that gives us great joy and great life. Well, let's talk about what's happening at the beginning of Nitzavim. Let's just use that for starters. So Nitzavim starts out by saying, "Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Adonai Elohechem." You are all standing here before the Lord your God, and he lists everybody: Rashechem, your leaders, Rashechem, Shiftechem, the tribes, Siknechem, Shotrechem, elders and officers or magistrates, Kol Ish Yisrael, and then goes on beyond that. And it's an extraordinary scene. It's a covenantal moment. This is the Moav covenant moment. We had a Chorev Sinai moment. We're having a moment here. We're going to have other moments of covenanting. And he says in this, inimicable way, it's not only you who are here, but it's all the people who are not here. All the people who are here standing, and all the people who aren't here. And he's not referring to people that sleep in on Shabbos.
Of which there are.
Who's he referring to here?
Well, there's sort of two obvious possibilities, and both, I think the pshat, the simple semantic meaning, is the future people. This is a covenant that I'm making with you and all your foregoing generations. I would say it's also on a poetic resonance, the not just the succeeding generations, but the foregoing, this as the passage goes on and says, I make this covenant to the end that God may establish to you to be his people, to be your God, as he promised you and swore to your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So you have this really awesome, Nitzavim to me is one of the most stirring, chapters in the Torah, because you just have this affirmative, all Am Yisrael moment at the covenant. Those who are here, those who are not here, including, as the Midrash fabulously says, those who would one day later convert to Judaism, and we're all making this affirmation. And I just think about, I'm sure we all feel. I certainly feel this strong Am Yisrael feeling. This feeling of my personal identity is because of my membership in the corporate body of Am Yisrael, and this chapter expresses it as well as anybody.
So I think that it's an attempt to give expression to the idea of eternity, that the covenant cannot be broken. And I would venture to say that for many people, we are apt to think of the breaker of the covenant as being God, when perhaps we need to focus more on ourselves. In that the question that we have to confront existentially is whether we in fact are faithful to the covenant, and not worry so much about whether God is faithful to the covenant.
Do you think so? I mean, I've been thinking lately about this very idea, especially as we are moving towards the holidays, and people's relationship with God as it becomes expressed. And we touched on this a little bit last week. I just want to mention this in a humorous tone, because one of our colleagues put up on his Facebook page, what would you like your rabbi to talk about or to say on Yom Tov? And people wrote in and said, how can you, be, how do you have an experience coming to shul if you don't believe in God, or if God is not part of your life? And comically, I wanted to write back and say, this is what I want my rabbi to talk about. Adon Olam is on page 630. That's what I wanted to say. But the idea that the covenant is broken certainly animates a lot of our contemporary thinking. I mean, Neil Gilman, Alav Shalom, wrote his major work that was the title, Sacred Fragments. The covenant has been fragmented by so many things, including modernity, including the Holocaust. The Irving Yitz Greenberg idea, which is, the covenant is kind of broken, and we as Jews have to acknowledge that, and that we're not only responsible. I mean, maybe you want to clarify that.
But Yitz, I think, said, because the very idea of a covenantal religion, a brit between God and humanity, and within God and Israel a brit with itself, that is to say, our human duties and our heavenly duties. Yitz Greenberg said that with the Shoah, you can't really expect God to do God's part. And so therefore, the most faithful Jews in all of history are those who kept the covenant, even when they suspected that God would not keep the divine covenant. And so we are so loyal to this path, and we are so faithful to this covenant, that even if you think that you can't count on God, I'm still following the path. I'm still devoted to this way of life.
And that is a huge challenge. That's a tremendous challenge for a person of faith, which is, and maybe it's the Deuteronomy challenge too, because Deuteronomy is also kind of projecting a world in which, the temple may not be what we think it is, and the priesthood not what we think it is, and Moses is not going to be, this towering colossal presence beyond the Jordan, but Torah is, and you're going to have to live with that.
So
I would say at least part of this that works so well in this parasha it began at the very beginning of, not the very beginning of Deuteronomy, but early in Deuteronomy. It says, listen, I've placed before you, blessing and curse. And here, that's like the opening of this long speech. And then at the end, it's, again, I placed before blessing and curse, good and evil and life and death, therefore choose life. It places the onus, the responsibility, and the possibility of this religious life in our hands. I think that one of the really interesting questions about religion, we who have a halachic religion, a religion of law, there's a way in which, because God said so, is the dominant way people have of talking about it. And then the main thing that human beings do is obey. And I think like a lot of orthodoxy in the United States, like, what do you really have to do? You have to obey. Why should I obey? Because the Torah says obey. Okay, it's part of the religious, toolkit is obedience, but choosing and autonomy are also really important. Like, to say, yes, I love this. I'm not just obeying someone else's command. I am taking it on. I am making it myself. And this bit about, the crossroads of life and death and good and evil, a blessing and curse, therefore choose life, is the great big affirmation to me, not just of obedience, but for affirmation and autonomy and choice.
So, okay, so and maybe you could read that into one of the iconic verses of this Parsha, which it says, I'll just read the last words of it. Ki karov elecha hadavar. It's close to you. The Torah is not in heaven. The Torah is not beyond the sea. The Torah is right here. Karov elecha hadavar ma'od. It's accessible to you. Beficha uvilvavcha lasoto. It's in your mouth. It's in your heart to do it. And so as I read this verse, I'm thinking, like, did we shoot ourselves in the foot by making, it not so simple and not so easy and slightly different? I mean, all of us are sitting within reach of hundreds of books, hundreds and hundreds of books that are trying to answer every question, every explanation, and it seems that you have to have extraordinary mastery for this. And that's intimidating.
I think I agree with much of what you say, but I also think the necessity for extraordinary mastery is perhaps somewhat overstated. So while the two of you were talking, I was thinking there's a concept in Jewish theology known as Hester Panim, the hidden face of God. And the idea, which is rooted in the prophets, although it comes up in Deuteronomy as well, is this idea that God is not always there when we want him to be. Martin Buber devoted a book to that idea, the eclipse of God. And, I'm thinking, what does it mean when we have an eclipse? It means that something has come between us and something else. We're both still there, but there's some brokenness, some barrier that prevents us from meeting the other. And, I sometimes wonder if what prevents us from truly meeting God is not halakha, because we become so subsumed by the need to obey, we lose sight of the fact that we're supposed to be concerned not just with the mitzvah, the commandment, but with the mitzaveh, the commander. And a lot of times I suspect the pursuit of mitzvot, of commandments, undermines our ability to relate to God.
So it's like there's an Israeli writer. His name is Dov Elboim, and he comes from a former. He spoke in your shul, right, Jeremy?
Yeah.
He's an interesting guy, and he grew up in a religious background. And there's this. He comes on a cameo appearance on the series Srugim, and the character who's questioning her religiousness asks him, what is it like to be him now, to have left his religious upbringing of mitzvot and halacha, and he says in a very beautiful way, he says, I'm much more religious than I've ever been. I always kind of think about that. It's it obviously presents a caricature of that individual who has choser b'shelah, right? He turns away and he's asking questions, but it validates the sense that it's the systems and the laws and the rigor is complicated for many people, and it can be stifling. Now we live, I think, in a way that both moderates that, understands that, interprets things, with great flexibility, because we see that as the tradition. We wouldn't take that tack as saying, I leave it and therefore I'm closer. We are saying, though, and I would say this, and we all would say this, the problem for our Jews, I guess, is that they need a little inspiration. They need to be shown a certain thing, that look how joyful it is, look how wonderful it is. It's so close. Shabbat is actually not that difficult to do. Shabbat, I mean, I say this all the time to people. If you want to do one thing, just do Shabbat. Just and don't even just do 10% of Shabbat. And you will see that the dividends in your life will be phenomenal. What could be wrong? What could be bad about sitting down to a dinner with the people you love most and saying, I'm not going to be online, I'm not going to be on my phone, I'm just going to focus on you.
I think the difficulty is that the claim of Shabbat from a religious point of view is that this day has to be different from the other 6 days.
Sure.
And a lot of people are not willing to do that. In other words, I remember having a conversation once with a person who wanted Shabbat to be just like every other day. And, that doesn't work. It may work for an individual. I'm not saying that, but it doesn't work for Judaism. No matter what kind of Jew you are, you need some idea that Shabbat is different. It doesn't have to be halachic, but it's got to be different. It cannot be the same as Friday and Sunday.
And so what I'm saying here, based on this verse, is it's actually not that hard to do. We've established a whole edifice that may look imposing, but it's not hard. Look, is it hard to learn a language? Is it hard to pick up a text once in a while? Is it hard to read a psalm? Is it hard to read a verse? Is it hard to listen to Parasha talk?
That's easy.
Is it hard to engage? And that seems to be a question. I'm struggling with that, because I don't think it's that hard.
It's not. I mean, that's the point of the verse. Lo b'shamayim hi, lo me'ever layam hi. It's not up in heaven. It's not across the ocean. It does. Being a Jew and finding this meaningful, both in the ritual ways and in the ethical ways and in the spiritual ways, they're not that hard to do. But I do think that Barry's onto something when saying, and even for the three of us who are, like seriously observant, if in a non-Orthodox way, we are seriously observant in the details of Jewish practice. Anybody who does that knows that there's a way in which you can hide from true spirituality and true religious meaning in the details. Like, I really, it's the grandest, biggest, most important questions. You can, if you spend all your religious energy checking for shatnez, or like, there's a way in which kashrut is one big gigantic obsessive compulsive disorder, and you can just shower your attention on making sure that the milk doesn't touch the fleishiks, and you've waited 6 hours and you've done. I think that can sap the religious meaning. So when it works, it's beautiful and poetic, and it makes every action meaningful. But you can also hide from big questions because you're so focused on Pekayim ones.
Right. So that brings us back to Moses in a sense, because I think what you're suggesting is that religion requires both diligence and vigilance. And we're left with this image, or we will be in another couple of weeks, of Moses alone on top of the mountain.
Can we just repeat those words, please? Diligence and vigilance.
Vigilance.
Diligence and vigilance. Okay.
Yeah.
Do that 10 times, please, listeners.
No, I think the last time I did it, I misspoke. So I'm glad I got it right this time.
Diligence and vigilance. I'm going to use that.
With my blessing, of
Good,
course.
good, good.
So we're going to be left with this idea of Moses on top of the mountain. And, you know, the beauty of that last scene of Moses's life is that, at least according to the rabbis, he dies at the mouth of God, meaning the kiss of God, who withdraws his breath as he had breathed it in at his birth. And Moses is left alone, but with God. And what could be more beautiful and more powerful than that?
Yeah, just maybe he would want to be around his family, or maybe,
Well, that's actually, you got to say that's actually a shortcoming or a feature of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is that, like the Catholic priests say, they can't have their own personal families because the church is their family. Moshe Rabbeinu, he does have at least one wife and he does have at least two children, but we don't really hear a whole lot about them. And as a matter of fact, there's the famous episode in Vayelekh where Miriam and Aaron complain against Moshe because of the Ethiopian woman that he took. Modern Americans will always read that as, because of the role of racism in our society, modern Americans will always read that as they complained against him because he took a black wife. And so they're portrayed as racist, but that's not the main way that pre-modern Jewish readers, the Rashi says, according to Midrash, that they complained on behalf of the Ethiopian woman because Moses was celibate. He wasn't being a good husband. Not they complained about her, they complained on her behalf because Moshe didn't have a family life. He was too busy talking to the Rabbanu Shalom, so he didn't even care about the people in his life. And I think by the way, we all know that's a human phenomenon, that, you're married to your job and not your family, or you only care about the big stuff and not the small stuff. So I think that's resonant.
Maybe we're a step ahead of the ending, but we are dealing with the pathos of the end here, and I'm wondering, it comes out in Moses in some ways. The ending of these parshiot, and certainly the Song of Moses at the end, is quite dark. Does Moses eventually accept his death? Does Moses, or are we as readers, what are we supposed to feel here? What is our experience?
Like you guys said earlier, the book seems to have multiple endings. This is not that uncommon because the texts are composite. Moses's poem that we read on Simchas Torah about singing the praises of each tribe, that's an end. Next week, Ha'azinu is a poem that is also a kind of a dark poem. That's an end. Nitzavim, the covenantal affirmation, that's an end. So like the book ends a couple of times. But what do I want to be the case? I don't know if I'm saying that this is the case. I think Ha'azinu and the Vayelekh section of this week's Parsha are really quite dark, in which Moses says, you people are going to go bad. I know you're going to go bad. And maybe that's the moment in which a very, very successful, but not totally redemptive leader says, I didn't accomplish what I thought I was going to accomplish. I didn't leave you entirely, aligned to God. But what I want to have happen is that I want religion to teach you to be reconciled to your death. Yes, you are mortal. God is immortal. You are mortal. God is infinite. You are finite. And I want religion to teach you how to understand that.
Moses does say some beautiful things here. We can't end our talk here without the iconic verse of all time of Acharta v'Chaim. That's the capstone of the whole thing. Choose life, which is on some levels hard to interpret, but it's not that hard to interpret because everybody faces all sorts of challenges in life, and daily, for many people, that choice is really a huge struggle. And the Torah is saying, I'm behind you, I'm with you. I want to give you the courage. I want to give you the courage to make those decisions. I want to give you the courage to live your life, to find inspiration, to find things to latch on to, because this is the way that's going to give you tremendous meaning, tremendous joy, and tremendous life. And I always think that that's beautiful. I mean, it's just the beautiful way that the Torah is ending. It's saying, choose life. And of course, what's the way to choose life? Through Torah, because Torah is life.
Real life.
Marbeh Torah, marbeh chayim. The more Torah, the more life.
Tihem chayenu ve'orech yameinu. This is what makes life worth living.
Yeah.
We are so lucky to be Jews. Most people aren't Jews. We're very lucky. We're the lucky few.
It's we pay a price for it, obviously, through history and through our existence. But Ashreinu matov chalkenu is what you're saying. Happy is our lot, and happy is our portion that we were born into this, and that many of us, of course, have chosen this, and we're all choosing different places, to be around Torah and to be around the community, and to make our way back. In some way, we didn't talk about these texts, but there's tremendous texts in this parsha about return, vishav, go back, come back. I just want to end with tshuva is about coming back. And we're coming back to ... We're coming back to God. We're coming back to Torah. We're coming back to a way of life that is, set out for us, and that's going to be our blessing, I guess.
Well, we're reclaiming the path, right? We've been on the path, we've deviated from it, we've gotten lost, and now we have an opportunity to get back on the path.
We're getting back on the path. We're going to get back on the path.
No, I think that's what teshuvah means. That
last week you talked about dislocation, and or not dislocation. You talked about this. We're all displaced people. I like that. I like that a lot. And this week we're talking about how we all need to kind of get back on the path. And I think for the people that have joined us, our listeners and viewers, what a message to give to us and to each other, that during the remaining days of Elul, as we make our way back, let's make our way back on the path. Let's find our path to Torah, to what's close to us, and the path to Hashem, who's also close to us, and path to each other.
He's waiting for us.
He's waiting for us. Amen. In the meantime, we thank you for watching. We thank you for listening. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next edition of Parsha Talk. In the meantime, Shabbat Shalom. And we'll see you next week on Parsha Talk.